I was born in Paris, but when I was 3, my parents returned to Krakow. And that was not the best choice. 3 years later, the war started. Just before the war started, the people of Krakow were fearing that they will be the first to be bombed or attacked because Krakow is the furthest west. Our father sent me with my mother and my sister to Warsaw. They thought Warsaw would be safer. Warsaw is far east. It was not at all like this. The first bombs fell on Warsaw, of course. So I went through this beginning of the war. We were bombed practically every night. There was a nightmare, of course, every night. When we went back to Krakow, I went to a school, but only for a couple of weeks, no more, because then the Jewish children were not allowed to go to school anymore. After a while, the Germans started building the wall around the ghetto. I have a vivid memory of my sister calling me to the window and saying, "Look what they're doing," and they were building a wall across the street. And I didn't quite understand at first what they were up to, and then my sister told me they're walling us up. And it was the moment when I understood they mean business, People were slowly running out of money. They were not allowed to work, most of them, except the forced work. Then they were liquidating the parts of ghetto. They had lists of people, and they would come at night to take people away. They never took a family. They always took one member of the family, a father, mother, sister, We could know more or less what they were up to when they're going to raid. And on several occasions like that, my father or mother would take me to some acquaintances of ours and went back the next day. One of those raids, the first one, it was all happening somewhere above us, and we turned off all lights. We heard noises, screams, and shouts and shots. And my father stepped out on the landing to see what was happening. And at that time, they were dragging a woman by her hair, screaming. And that was the first memories for me of violence. Then soon after, I went to visit my grandma who was living on the other side of the ghetto. And on my way back, the street started emptying. I was a kid. I just was curious and stayed to see what was happening. And they were leading a column of women, some young, some very old. And just as they were passing, there was some old woman who was crying and wailing. And there suddenly was a gun in the hand of that young SS man, and he shot her in the back. And that was the first time that I saw something like that happen, And I had to get used to those type of scenes. My father came back to fetch me next day in the evening. I could see something was wrong. He was just kissing me too much. And as we were walking back to the ghetto, and we were going across the bridge, and on that bridge, I remember he suddenly said, "They took mother." And he started crying, weeping, in fact. And I was asking him not to, because they would spot us and see there was something and probably right away arrest him and me. I was still hoping that my mother would come back, but later we learned that that transport went directly to the gas chambers. My mother was pregnant, actually. So probably when they did the selection, they must have seen that, and she went straight to the gas chamber. I survived because I did not look very much like a Jew, particularly when I was a kid. I really looked like all other kids in Poland. I was living throughout the war with the peasants in the country in a very sort of medieval conditions. As Roman, but not Polanski, Wilk. This was the name of those people who kept me, you see. So I was living under this name until the end of the war, when the country was quiet. Paradoxically, was about 50 kilometers, maybe not even, from Auschwitz. But we would know nothing about what was happening on the other side of the wires, you know. I only learned about all the atrocities right after the war. Before liberation, just before I went back to Krakow, I was picking up berries in the forest, and suddenly I heard a hum, a loud hum, like You know, at the beginning I thought it was the insects, because the forest always has this background of insects. And then I realized it was coming from the sky. I looked up, and these were the American bombers, hundreds of them. It was one of the most joyful moments of my young life. I laid down on the ground and I was watching those planes. As far as the pianist is concerned, I can tell you I always wanted to make the picture about those things and that period in particular, but I didn't want to do it about Krakow. It was just too close home. When you make a movie, you always superpose the movie sets over the real streets and the movie characters over the people that you remembered. I would never do it. Besides, you know, the idea of making an autobiographical film about the war, it doesn't appeal to me. Talking to a youngster, or sometimes not even a youngster, but an adult who doesn't know anything about that period or about the things that happened. I'm not even talking about those who try to deny and assure us that it didn't take place, but I'm talking about those who are simply ignorant. I can tell you what my father, I was arguing with him after the war. I said, this can never happen again. He said, wait 50 years and you'll see. And I remember him saying that I thought he was, unfortunately, he was right. I tell you about one episode. My father was crying. My stepmother said, no, it's just about this music. There was music on the radio, you know, actually, this German song, Oh My Papa. Oh My Papa, da-dee-da-dee-da-da-da-da.
Oh, mein Papa war eine wunderbare Clown.
And my father tapped on the bed for me to sit next to him, so I sat and waited. And he said, when they liquidated the ghetto, they took all the people, before sending them to various death camps and working camps, they put them in the camps near Krakow, about 20 miles maybe, called Płaszów. From that place, they were sending them to those various camps. But children had to stay in the barracks. And then suddenly the trucks arrived and they started loading children on those trucks. But as the people who saw this happening, most of them were parents of those children, they started swaying and waving and moaning and screaming and crying and falling on the ground and tearing the mud on the ground. And that's what my father told me. It was apocalyptic. And he said that he was one of the few people who were still standing because he didn't have the kids being taken away, because I was in the country. But the Germans were very fond of public address system, and they were playing "Oh, mein Papa, da dee da dee da 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 da."